Welcome to Brothers in Media with the bros who know, Scott and Craig Colby. We're giving the tools that you need so that you can make media make sense. Broadcasting, for years, was the go-to source of primary news and opinions. But the rise in podcasting has given us a newer format with a much bigger role in shaping opinions.
According to the Podcasting Index, there are 4.5 million podcasts worldwide. More than 100,000 are published every 3 days. 584 million people have listened to podcasts so far this year. That is up more than 6% from the same period last year. You get the point. People listen to podcasts.
But are podcasts reliable? What role should they play in your information gathering diet? We're going to try to answer that question with some media experts, starting with Scott Colby. He is a journalist with 36 years of experience as a reporter, columnist, editor, photographer, and designer, as well as a national best-selling author and the creator of the Coach Colby Writing Academy. Visit his website, coachcolby.me, for a free insider's cheat sheet and how to write effective op-eds.
He is Craig Colby, who has spent 37 years in broadcasting. He's an award-winning executive producer and author and owner of Colby Vision, a video production and consulting company. Our guest today is Erin Trafford. She is an on-air journalist with Global Television, a former on-air journalist with Global Television and Rogers Communication in Halifax, and the current owner of the Story Studio Network, where she creates award-winning corporate-sponsored podcasts. Erin also helps companies form communication strategies, and she is the host of the Narrative Advantage podcast. We welcome Erin, a podcast expert, to our podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for this conversation.
Me too, because people are eating podcasts like breakfast cereal. They've just taken over everything, as Scott said with some of that data. But for you, as someone who's had a successful career in broadcasting and now a successful career in podcasting, and a communications expert, I think that's the biggest part of all of this. What do you see as the biggest difference for consumers between broadcasting and podcasting?
I think what I would say to that is it comes down to the habit. So right off the top, you kind of talked about that, Craig, when you said broadcasting for the longest time was where we would turn when we wanted information. And that became culturally like habit. You come home from work, you make supper, you sit in front of the TV and you watch the 6 o'clock news. That was what you did. Or you got in the car and you turned on the radio, and over your commute, you listened to the morning show and you got the news and you got the traffic, you got the weather. It was a cultural habit. And then what happened with podcasting is, and I don't think I told you this when we chatted last week, but my first ever podcast was in 2006. 2006 is when I started podcasting.
19 years ago.
It was, a long time ago. And I was at Western University, which was called UWO at the time.
Yeah, that's my alma mater.
Yeah. And I had to I was in grad school, and I had to go to the dean and ask for special permission to launch a podcast for the journalism school. And they let me do it. And I say this because that was really the dawn of the huge hockey stick curve in terms of usage of the internet and smartphones, right? So podcasts started around 2006, 2007, really nerdy folks like me. And then all of a sudden you see that explosion happen over the last 20 years as our habits have changed. So long-winded way of saying, I think the primary difference now is our habits. And that's how we look at broadcasting versus podcasting through completely different lenses now.
But as a consumer picking these things up, right?
Yeah.
What advantages are there to listening to broadcasting, and what advantages are there listening to podcasting?
Oh my goodness. Well, I yell a lot more when I listen to broadcasts.
What way?
It's just like,
Yelling at the screen, or
it's just like, oh, why did you say it like that? I find, and this is definitely just me or those of us who have come up in the industry, is that I do tend to hold broadcast to a much higher standard, which answers, that's my answer to one of your questions off the top, is like, how are they different? And how can we trust podcasts? Is because I think mentally, emotionally, psychologically, we do think of them as different. We have these unwritten and very different rules for what we expect to experience when we watch a broadcast or listen to a broadcast versus a podcast. So I would say I look at it through that. Like when I'm listening to podcasts, I'm actually more emotionally attuned, I find, and I'm less likely to be critical.
Is that because it's more personal?
I think so. I mean, and it also comes down to, there's this trope in podcasting, and like everybody's saying, it's like people listen to podcasts because they want to be educated and entertained at the same time, right? That's not why we would have watched the news in the olden days, in the before times, right? Like we would watch the news because we wanted to, yes, be informed, but there was a certain cultural requirement, like that democratic requirement of being an engaged citizen that played a part in watching broadcast news or partaking in talk radio or even reading the newspaper, that I don't think fully exists with listening to podcasts. I think it's more of this is a me FM. It's a curated playlist. It's curated to, I have certain podcasts I listen to when I'm walking the dog. I have certain podcasts I listen to when I'm out for my morning run. Like, it's all about how I want to feel versus me participating in a cultural dialogue. Does that
Right, but that, I guess
align
that's
with
the question, and I think Craig had it in his list of questions. Is I mean, broadcasting, you have to, you're regulated by the CRTC. You have to have standards. Podcasts, it's the Wild West.
Yeah.
So you kind of you're on your own, right, as a consumer.
And it's funny you should say Wild West, because I think we've been saying, like, I mean, I launched Story Studio Network accidentally on purpose in 2021 when I started to see this shift. And, I don't know if I'm brave or stupid in business, but I like to launch things. It's how I've kind of always failed forward, right? Fallen forward, failed forward, success, whatever, just by doing one foot in front of the other. So Story Studio Network never was meant to be what it became, but it became that because I just kept asking this question of, like, what if we did this with podcasts? And what if we did this with podcasts? And what would be cool to do with a brand this way with podcasts? And so Wild West, it's been the Wild West since 2019. And in closed door circles, we're all kind of waiting for the CRTC to be like, wait a minute. And they like, haven't yet. But maybe I shouldn't have said that, because now I'm like, oh gosh, they're going to hear this and be like, we need to regulate
right now.
But I mean, and I think it's a double-edged sword, right? Like regulation, there's certain good things that come with that level of scrutiny. And then there's also like all of the stuff that you don't want to deal with and that make things more difficult to do. But by and large, if I'm being honest, I do think it's strange that we're still in the Wild West, like almost a decade later. It's super weird.
Well, in historically, the Wild West, I think, lasted about 30 years. So,
okay.
We're still in the sweet spot.
We've got another 20 years of Joe Rogan. Great.
and everyone else who's in the pile. And I think one of the things that Scott alluded to and you're talking about is credibility. You often hear that media trust is at an all-time low, but media distrust has been there always. I don't think there's ever been a time there hasn't been media distrust to one degree or another. But as you said, media is held to a higher standard. And if that standard isn't met, then people get angry, right?
Yep.
They get angry at papers and broadcasters and everything else. A lot of friends of mine who are in the media right now are angry at broadcasting for not covering the things they think should be covered. With podcasting, anyone can say anything. Right? Like Joe Rogan is considered, I don't know if he's considered an expert, but certainly an opinion leader. And his opinion matters to a lot of people, even though he will admit often that he's uninformed in it. How do people divine credibility in all of these podcasts?
Well, I think it comes down to awareness, right? And I mean, there's always going to be people who just take everything at face value. Like, if it was on the news, it's real. If it was on TV, it's real. Like we've always kind of dealt with that. You could go on I remember we used to tell the joke on the radio where it'd be like, it would clearly be pouring rain outside the studio window. And we'd be like, it's partly cloudy and no rain in sight. Beautiful day. And people would believe you. It's like, no, it's actually raining. So I think it comes down to awareness. And, what I do, and I've done this with not just podcasts, but things like audiobooks, which are just now also quite easy to crank out. Like anybody can publish a book now if you go through the Amazon publishing process and all that stuff. I mean, it's not easy, but like anyone can technically do it.
I've done it.
We've both done it, so anybody can do it.
So you know that, right? And I've every once in a while I do this thing where I do like I don't know if it's a competitive recon or if it's just kind of like why haven't I done this yet? And I go on a spree and I buy a bunch of books that are written by proclaimed experts in fields that I know things about, like podcasting and communications, and I'll buy their books. And every once in a while I'll read one and just be like, what? Like, why do they have a book and not me? So it's that like, do you have any sense, whether it's in your mind, in your emotions, in your body, that I'm not so sure about that. And one thing we also used to say, and I say this to my team all the time, is if somebody makes a statement and it's on a podcast or it's in the news, this works either way. And it inflames an emotional response in you that is at one end of the spectrum or the other. So it like makes you super, super angry, or it makes you like elated. You're so, 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 so happy. It can be either side, like a polarizing feeling. Just dig in. Because usually there's more there. You shouldn't be like, if you're feeling that drastic, maybe it is true, maybe it's not, but that's an indicator that something has gone on in the transmission of that story that is designed to provoke a reaction. Just dig in. That's what I would do. I mean, I did it the other day too. Sorry, I'm like talking your ear off, but we got a big announcement.
That's why you're here, Erin.
Well, we got, this is a good example, and this isn't podcasting, but it's just a way to see how this works. So we live in a small community outside of Halifax, and we've lived here for 15 years. So we've watched this community really grow around us, and there's new subdivisions and a new school was built. And so there's all kinds of new people. And one of the challenges that we're having is that there's 2 stoplights and one way in and one way out. So we've been pushing local government for the entire, last decade. Can we get a new connector road? Can we get a new, so it's been this local issue. And we got an announcement about 3 or 4 months ago from the government that they have approved a connector road. And I got so excited. Like, this is how nerdy I am. I ran up the stairs and said to my husband, "Oh, there's a thing in the local little a newspaper that they have at the grocery store. We're getting the connector road." And as soon as he looked into it, it was like, no, it's a feasibility study. It's not that. It wasn't what you thought it was. So, and I say that because it's a really concrete example of my emotions making me believe something was true, and it wasn't.
Right. You had to do your due diligence still.
I had to do my due diligence. And anyway, I'll see you in 10 years on the connector road, maybe.
And you're going back to, confirmation bias, how much we all love our confirmation bias.
Right. Yes, it's absolutely, that plays a part. So I know we're talking about the difference between broadcast and podcast, but it comes back to that standard. And then you got to think about the intention of the transmission. So when you're watching a news anchor or you're listening to a broadcaster, my hope is that they don't have an ulterior motive other than to do their job.
To inform you.
Right. That's their job.
Yeah.
And when you're listening to a podcast, yes, they might be monetizing it. And we can talk about how we do that at my shop. But that changes the perspective slightly. You have to think about the intentionality of what's coming at you, right?
I've been watching on, I think, Instagram Reels. I'm following a interview with a former CIA or FBI agent who talks about how they divine meaning from people. He said the first question you should ask yourself talking to anybody is, what does that person want me to think about them? And I think that's goes for, I mean, it's more true in broadcasting than I care to think.
Yep.
When you look at the spectrum, especially down in the States, what do they want you to think? What are they trying to get you to think? And I think the same uh, question can be asked when you're listening to any podcast. What are they trying to get me to think?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Especially, as you said, if it's really pumping your confirmation bias, if it really gets you feeling like you're super smart. I personally know I'm not that smart, so I always try to do a check to see if there's something else behind it. But
Mm-hmm.
also the ones that are rage baiting you. And what I think you're getting back to, Erin, is the way that people get you engaged, especially in social media, is by either making you really happy or making you really angry. And angry seems to win more than most.
It's one of the reasons I got out of the business, to be honest. It was like, if you're not angry, you're not listening. If you're not outraged, you're not listening. And that was, you know, I it, to be vulnerable for a second, when I got the gig and got to host the talk show, um, it was like, oh, this is everything I ever wanted. It is everything I ever worked toward. And I was the youngest female given the desk. Um, on Canadian airwaves at the time, which I didn't fully appreciate because, again, I was the youngest female. Like, I wasn't in a place to actually appreciate what I was given. But what I realized was the dissonance and the incoherence in me was that it's not my style to attract and tell stories that way. And yet that's what I was being asked to do. Um, so now, when we formed Story Studio Network, my promise and part of our mission is that we do that gut check. Are we out there enraging just to put the brands and the storylines front and center? Or are we like throwing and shining a light on an issue that, yes, is highly polarizing, yes, is super emotional, um, but in service of that emotion becoming advocacy in one way or the other, like in one direction or the other. So writing to a member of parliament, going out and volunteering at a charity, like what's the next step? And I think that's what's cool about podcasting is, and I've learned this by, again, accidentally on purpose as we've grown the company and worked with a bunch of really cool brands and really neat projects, is that those are the ones that people remember. Is like when you bring your audience to an emotional peak and then tell them what you wanted them to do about that.
Right. Call to action.
It's and it's less about here's what I want you to think. It's more empowering the audience with here are your options. And that was something that as a talk show host, as a news anchor, I was never able to do. You would just bring someone to an emotional brink and then say, in other news, and like quite literally move on. Right.
You're
So
talking about podcasting almost as an advocacy.
completely. And that's the A word. And that's one of the signals when I meet with somebody. If they come and they say, I want to be an influencer, I want to have a celebrity style podcast, I say, cool, go across the street. If they come to me and they say, listen, we've got this really meaty issue and we're getting good earned media, broadcast is picking it up. And yet there is so much more there that we need in order to activate advocacy. That's where I'm like, okay, cool, let's have a conversation, because that's where I think broadcasting and podcasting play really well together.
At the start, you talked about podcasting being a combination of entertainment and informing, right? You need to entertain people, whereas broadcast news isn't necessarily the goal as an entertainment, isn't it? I mean, obviously, you want it to be interesting enough that people will stick with the show.
Yeah.
So now you're kind of throwing in a third thing, advocacy. Is that a third leg of the stool, or is that just part of the entertainment? Is it part of the informing?
I think it can be. It doesn't have to be with everything. Because I mean, there's some podcasts you listen to that are just about comedy. There's not going to be an advocacy play there.
Right.
But I think if you're walking you're walking that line of podcasting as a new form of new media or new journalism. I do think that advocacy is what makes it work, because it's a next level of conscious engagement and invitation for the audience. Yeah.
Right. So I think with Craig and I in our podcast here, we're trying to inform people
Mhm.
about how the media works. And I guess we don't have an like a call to action button that you would click on a website, but it is encouraging people to be critical thinkers.
Mhm. Mhm.
And be more aware of what they're consuming.
Yeah.
I would say the advocacy part in all of this is I've seen people just say the media is corrupt, the media lies. I know that's not true. Some of the first podcasts we did, we brought on people and we talked about lying. Had they seen lying? Had they had pressure from above to run a certain story or run a certain story a certain way? And from all the people we've talked to, there have been less than a handful of stories in that regard. This is an advocacy for being critical of media, but also understanding what media is and how it does. And it's not that. Now, at the same time, we're all aware of certain bad actors out there who do use formats and to the news format to push ideals in the States. If you're a cable channel, and this includes Fox and News One and CNN, you are not subject to any FCC regulation. You can say whatever you want, and the downside is you get sued, which Fox did for what, $770 million because they lied on air and they admitted they did it to get ratings.
Mhm.
And so going back to what you said earlier, television news is entertainment. I remember reading an autobiography of Sam Donaldson, a former ABC reporter. That's one of the first things he said in the book. Yeah, this is entertainment. The way they're dressed, the way the sets are. I remember going in for one of my first shifts at Sports Desk, and the anchors, it was a beautiful set. The anchors wore suits on top and they wore jeans underneath. And as soon as you panned off the set, it looked like a warehouse. So there is always an entertainment aspect to news,
Yep.
to anything on television. But at the same time, you hope that there is an inherent credibility in the fact that somebody's overseeing this and they're responsible for it.
It's so funny you should say that too, because one of the trends that I've noticed in podcasting is, and I'm sure you've noticed it too, is this trend to I glossify the podcast. So like podcast sets are now starting to look like television sets. And if you really want to be super critical about that, I would ask the same questions. Like, what do you want? What are they hoping you're going to think about them? They're they're trying to legitimize themselves subconsciously by looking like what we have always trusted.
Mhm.
So I think too, like, the fact that we're all just sitting in our home offices, we're using this really cool streaming service, we're not overly buttoned up, and like, this is just how we are on a whatever day it is, Tuesday afternoon. Um, actually is the credibility builder for podcasts, where if we did this on broadcast TV, everybody would be like, is there something wrong? Are we seeing the wrong thing? Or you know what I mean?
One of the reasons I don't use a fake background is during the pandemic, when we started doing these Zoom calls, I liked seeing people in their natural environment. I think
Yeah.
there's authenticity and it tells you a little bit about that person. And I
Yeah.
think if you're doing something like this, at least part of what you want is to be known. And if you can be known, then you may have some trust.
I built this office without knowing that I was going to be having a baby during a pandemic. So when I did it, I set it up so that I could have a whole bunch of spots to do podcasting. So like I've got 3 different shots going on in this space, and but it was all to just kind of show like this is my office. It's a working space. I've got a camera down there. I've got a camera over here. I've got this one, and um, that all went to pot though once the baby came. The pandemic I was fine with. It was just the pandemic plus the baby. That
The
was
babies change things, huh?
that was a wild time. And we launched Story Studio Network, by the way. So, if you want to interview someone crazy, just, you have my number.
Okay, when we do the crazy episode, we'll have you.
Yeah.
We've been experimenting with podcasts. Obviously, I think this is episode 11. 12. And I've been I do some speaking and as well on opinion writing and other things. And a lot of what I've been reading about with podcasting is like it's okay. The culture allows you to be yourself, allows you to not be polished. You see people doing, they have B-rolls of themselves chopping vegetables and they walk down the street like they're not trying to look professional.
Yeah.
involved. Because I guess that creates the authenticity. It creates a connection that we're like each other, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Do you see that now changing? Do you think the culture in podcasts is going to, in order to stand out, or maybe to give people that fake false sense of authenticity that or authority that we have to put on? I have to put a suit coat on, and throw a little green screen behind me and make it look like a TV studio.
No, I don't, and that's why I think I'm critical of the over glossification of podcasts. So, like, I'm in the middle of an experiment right now on the narrative advantage, because I had a previous podcast, that did really, really well for me in my business, and then things changed when I launched Story Studio Network, so I kinda wanted to reevaluate how I was showing up myself on a podcast. So Narrative Advantage only just launched. We're like 20, I say we, it's just me. We're 22 episodes in.
We
And I,
sounds good though.
we,
Yeah,
it's the royal we.
royal we.
It's me and the Erin who presents and the Erin who edits and the Erin who makes all the mistakes. It's all of us.
Yeah.
I'm not using my team for it too, which is annoying them to all get out, but it's a fun experiment. Anyway, I am in the middle of proving the point that you just made. So I am going on the podcast and I'm putting it on YouTube every single day for October of 2025. Weekends included. I'm doing it daily. And some days I'm showing up before I go for my run. So I'm wearing my workout gear and my reflective hat, and I'm sitting down and I'm doing the show. And I'm just not cutting it other than just the silence at the beginning and the end, and I'm putting it out. Um, some days I'm doing it in the middle of the day because that's when I have time, and so on and so forth. And I have noticed zero negative response to that level of, hey guys, I literally haven't had coffee yet. I have no makeup on, but here's what you need to know today
Right.
that has occurred to me. So I'm proving the point that the authenticity the authenticity has to be authentic. It can't be fabricated. Um, and watch out for those podcasters who feel like they need to look like celebrity brands. I would just be wary of that.
I can give you two different examples of looks of podcasts like that. They're both celebrity podcasts.
Mm,
Jon Stewart's podcast is clearly done in their office, and he's wearing a long sleeve T-shirt and whatever.
yeah,
And his guest is in the office.
yeah.
And then there's Shannon Sharp, the football broadcaster. He has one that is clearly a well-lit studio, sponsored. It could be on ESPN. And certainly the vibe of both of them is completely different. Now, both of them have their own credibility. So I don't think it matters as much for either of them. Certainly Jon Stewart's credibility is kind of unquestioned anyway. So he can
do whatever he
do it
wants.
on the street, he can do whatever he wants.
Yeah.
But yeah, presentation, you seem to get be off the hook a little bit more, and maybe even a little more credible by presenting in a natural environment in podcasting.
I also think it's really funny that we've just naturally assumed that podcasts are all visual now, because
Right.
they're not.
Yeah.
They're really not. There is,
Do you have any stats on that? Like how
yeah,
many people watch podcasts versus listen to podcasts?
I do, and I'd be happy to share some research with you to put in the show notes because I don't have it top of mind. But there was recent data in the last, in the last 6 weeks since the summer that came out from both YouTube and then Signal Hill Insights, which, if you want to really go digging into what's happening with Canadian podcast listening in particular, Signal Hill is hands down the best place to look for the research and the numbers. And they had a couple really interesting observations about the way that the industry has changed, because YouTube came and tried to take over about 18 months ago. And it was like fire and brimstone. Podcasting is going to end. Everybody has to do video and blah, blah, blah. And that's really not how things have transpired. What we're seeing is a very distinct splitting of the stream. If I could, use the kind of like don't cross the streams, like the Ghostbuster kind of visual, is that you're getting very specific audiences who listen to audio only. And this is why at Story Studio, 95% of what we do is audio only. And the reason is because we focus on narrative style content, which is extremely difficult to turn into video. Craig, you know this. It's a whole different kettle of fish to do a narrative style podcast and then just dupe it for video. It doesn't work that way. But the other reason is because the majority of the folks that we're going for audience wise on most of our shows are folks I would describe as VP level and above, as in they have a certain net worth, they have a certain lifestyle, they have a certain expectation of the way that they're consuming their media, and they don't want it to interfere. So they're not sitting there logging onto YouTube like my 9-year-old every day, right? So and then you're also seeing huge uptick in the YouTubes when you do put it on YouTube, but you have to recognize, and the evidence is showing this now, they are two very different audiences. They're very, very different. And if you are not going for that millennial and under audience, I would question whether you need to even burn the time doing the video, or just do like what I'm doing, which is put it up there for sake of SEO, but don't polish it.
Right.
Because nobody's watching it.
Yeah. People are listening to it on their drive, on their run.
Yes.
Making dinner. Yeah.
Some of that is tousled, really skillfully done tousled hair, right? Like it's meant to look breezy, but it isn't. I'm talking about the influencer stuff.
Oh, yeah.
As far as, we do this on video because it's easy. And when I'm done with this, I don't do any editing to this at all, mainly because I don't have time. And I want people to get the unfiltered conversation, but mainly I don't have time. And it'll pump out the audio track and the video at the same time. So it's just easy to use. But they are different audiences and people consume them in different ways. And the video is up there, even though nothing spectacular is happening video-wise here. You do get information from people in the way they present themselves and the way they talk and their facial expressions.
Yeah.
I want to ask you one question as we get near the end of the time here. Credible source. It's pretty easy with TV to look for a credible source. It's easy to find out what the political affiliation is of a broadcaster. You can find that stuff very quickly. With podcast, because anybody can do it, how do you find the credibility? Obviously, we start this show by talking about our credibility and our guests' credibility. That's the reason to listen to this show, is because we've been in media our whole lives. So we have experience to this that people don't. For anybody picking up podcasts, many of whom are sponsored, almost all of whom have an agenda, how can people establish the credibility of the person they're listening to in a podcast?
Well, it just comes back to all doing the research, right? How long have they been doing what they say that they've been doing? There's so many tools at your disposal. This doesn't have to be difficult. So I think I shared this with you, Craig, last week when we chatted, that I had one of those moments where I was listening to something and it had caused an emotional reaction in me. I was like, whoa, what was that? And I was out on a run and it was bad enough that I remembered like 8 kilometers later to go home and check it out. So I did. It's like, I was listening to this and she said this, and I put it into AI and I put it into Google. And it turns out that there were a bunch of lawsuits against her, that there was a lot of questioning of her credibility publicly that admittedly, before I downloaded her book, I hadn't actually looked into. So I think it comes down to that intentionality, their credibility. The onus is on you to actually care whether what you're consuming is true or not. Like, we're never going to get over that. So, but if something tweaks you or something so outlandish is said, it's your job to go use the tools in your pocket to determine, is this person able to say this with a certain degree of credibility that meets my standard? So Google it, look at what they've been doing, check out, do they have a LinkedIn profile? Does a LinkedIn profile match their credibility, especially in B2B, right? Anybody can go out there and say, I've done 8 figures in sales, blah, 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 blah. And like every once in a while I look something up and I'm like, you're 22 years old. No, you have not. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I know exactly what you mean. So just to summarize what we've talked here, because one of our guests, Ed Hirsch, said, tell them what you're going to tell them and then tell them what you told them. Podcasts are great. We didn't really talk about this, but they offer more depth. This conversation would have been 4 minutes on broadcast TV tops, give you more depth. They allow you to curate things that go to your own personal interest more than broadcasts do. But you have to be careful in that you have to know who is telling you this stuff, where they're coming from, and what their credibility is.
Amen.
And obviously, and look for advocacy and agendas, because agenda is not necessarily a bad thing, so long as you understand what it is. And now is the time in the show you talked about self-publishing, where Scott and I sell our books. Scott, do you want to go first?
That's What You Think, a practical guide to writing op-eds and short memoirs. So if you want to become a better writer, get this book. It's that simple.
And The Unqualified Hockey Coach, 7 stories about personal connection. If you want to understand why you matter and the things you do matter, you can find 7 good examples of that in this book. You can get it on Amazon, and I'm looking to get it out on another source for people who may have a problem with Amazon.
I forgot to mention too, I have never met, I had this, I actually did an audiobook of this too. So it's out there on Audible, and I've sold a total of 6 copies. It came out more than a year later, but the guy did a fantastic job. So I hope people will listen to it on Audible while they're like a podcast. They can go for their run, they can make their meals, and or whatever. So,
Erin, is there anything you'd like to promote?
I mean, just you can check out the unvarnished, no makeup pre-workout me on YouTube and or the podcast. So everything is linked up on my personal website, erintrafford.com. And certainly if you're interested in the work that we do at Story Studio Network, check that out too. Website hasn't been updated in a while. So best thing to do is also follow me on LinkedIn, because that's where all the new stuff hits the web.
On the Narrative Advantage. Daily right now. It's daily.
Mm-hmm.
daily.
A daily dose of Erin Trafford. Erin, thank you so much for sharing your
natural environment.
Yes.
Every day.
Erin, thanks so much for sharing your expertise with us. I'm a big fan of everything you do. I follow you on all the socials. I think what you're doing is fantastic. Big admirer of the work you're doing. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us and our audience.